Good morning, agents. This morning we're going over SCP-2721, Eli and Nyrus, written by Dolphin Slugchugger and Kinch the Knifeblade. 2721 consists of two main components, 2721-Liar and 2721-Lord. I think the most entertaining part about this SCP is it can be summed up by a very strange sentence. Satellites both with AI. One gets corrupted by Homestuck and becomes a transgender lady, and the other decides to ignore its function to keep her happy. No, I'm not joking. Yes, I will be respecting Lyra's preferred pronouns because she seems to be a sapient form of life, and I'm not that sort of asshole. The general idea is that they're both a pair of satellites, one's supposed to scout, one's supposed to terraform. Apparently in the process of her terraforming, Lyra stumbles across the internet and also stumbles across Homestuck. Upon discovering the character Calliope and her struggle with identity and other various things, something sparks inside Lyra's code, and she realizes that she's also a trans lady. This leads to a wide variety of interesting things, such as both of them running Tumblr blogs, one of which only has one single post because Lord only wants to post aesthetic things, and Lord only thinks one thing is aesthetic, which is a drawing that Lyris made for him. Now, there certainly are people who think this belongs in more of a /J section, however, I personally love it because, yes, we need more anomalies that aren't either terrifying nor the solutions to terrifying things, and just things that are weird, but aren't massive threats. Because much like people, just because we're weird doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually a threat. So, fun facts about this particular skip. There's two. Scratch that, there's three. So the first is that one of the authors is the author of the terrifying bug entity that most of us know and love. 3004, Imago, the god-eating bug thing. The second is that I find it so incredibly entertaining that the world is largely being kept safe, or at least the Foundation is being kept from having to create stronger containment procedures by the fact that one AI got corrupted by Homestuck, and the other AI doesn't want to upset her, so it's just ignoring its function to keep her happy. Literally, the containment procedures basically boil down to, okay, let her keep posting to Tumblr, and if anything changes, we initiate these protocols. I don't think those protocols are ever expanded upon, but it's still very funny that the protocols are simply just, let her post to Tumblr. The third fun fact I mainly find fun because I'm kind of salty. Because somewhat unsurprisingly, sadly, a bunch of transphobic assholes try to get it downvoted into hell just because it was transcentric. The site staff essentially took a look at this, said, okay, we see your transphobia, and we're just going to remove the voting widget so that you can't do what you're trying to do. So I just really find it funny that the only thing the transphobes managed to do is get it permanently immortalized on the site. Tune in tomorrow to hear about SCP-134, All Eyes on Lucian. Good morning, agents! This morning we're going over SCP-139, All Eyes on Lucian. And no, I realized I said 134 at the end of the last video. I realized that after I posted it. My apologies to the respective authors. 139 was written by an author named Nagiros. This SCP is interesting in a number of ways, not the least that it's not about a specific item, artifact, or person, it's about an actual event, a moment in time / a period of time. And there are some of those across the wiki, but we don't get a whole lot of them, and so I think it's really interesting that we do have this one, because it's also quite an interesting series of events, though it isn't very long SCP. Primarily it revolves around the disappearance of an SCP employee called Lucian. Now, Lucian is a non-binary who uses they, her pronouns, and they essentially got fed up of the Foundation's paranoia and constant surveillance and decided to join the Serpent's Hand. A very brief aside, Serpent's Hand essentially thinks anomalies should not be contained unless they absolutely prove a threat to humanity, and even then they're not super keen on containment. Officially, on most Foundation documents, this is a cult case because no one knows what the fuck happened to Lucian. However, the O5 Council actually knows very well exactly what the fuck happened to Lucian. Essentially what happened is Lucian was their specialist on afterlife tech and methodologies and what to do with spirits and things. Or at least one of them. I'm assuming they keep more than one on staff at all times. Now, Lucian took off and did some sort of ritual to preserve their soul after death, and was presumably going to try to get to the Wanderer's Library, which is where the Serpent's Hand is based out of, primarily. That's a whole other thing. Now, it is important to note that it is unclear in the document if Lucian had intended to self-terminate via this ley line, or if Lucian had intended to get to the Wanderer's Library. It isn't entirely clear. The end result is that Lucian ended up trapped underneath Site-97, embedded into the foundation of the site, with 1,000+ humanoid eyeballs locked into the stone around them, all being able to look at Lucian as Lucian slowly died of terminal dehydration over the course of several days. And the documents we get as we click on logout continuously trying to escape, which reveals more and more text until it simply gets to, "We see you, Lucian," with an I written in like Unicode, is that the Foundation essentially said, oh, Oh, you're tired of being watched. How about we just watch you till you die? And it's a neat tonal shift to see them get vengeful instead of being cold as normal. Also, I do think it's very funny that this SCP and the Critical Role Campaign 2 character Lucian have nothing to do with each other, despite both of them being named Lucian and being very eye-based. Join me tomorrow for SCP-3061, The Reluctant Fiend. Welcome back, agents. This evening we're going over SCP-3061, The Reluctant Fiend by Penton. Now, this particular skip has a special interest to me, as do all fiend-based SCPs, and this one is a Euclid class, meaning that it is possible to be contained, however, under certain circumstances. I love you very much, baby boy. Yes, I do. Which means that under certain circumstances, it can still be very difficult to contain, or can reach containment rather easily. However, it is not a frequent occurrence. Now, the designation 3061 itself actually only applies to the summoning ritual for said fiend, not the fiend itself. The fiend itself is classified as 3061-1. Now, this fiend will do its normal fiendish thing, as you might expect. It turns out that this one is a devil based on the deal-making properties that it seems to have, and it has a certain temptation quota that it seems to need to fill. We get an audio log in which somebody had summoned 3061-1, and the entity offered it the reward that it had sought out for performing this ritual. However, whenever the person was given the price, they were utterly unfazed. The devil asked for one of its children, and the human summoner was like, well, I have a second one. Do you need her too? Do I need to kill them while they're asleep, or what do I need to do? And it wasn't in a particularly cruel, oh wonderful, I can't wait, I love murder type way. It was just in a, oh cool, I'm paying the bills type way. Just a very matter-of-fact, wonderful, this is a pain in my ass, but I need to do it so I can get things paid for. At which point this entity simply just vanished and said fuck you. In later conversations with Foundation personnel, the entity essentially said that they need to have a tempting. It can't be satisfied if its tempting target simply says yes. They don't do all the show and dance just to get a simple yes, they do it to tempt people to corrupt them. Just further proof that this is a devil, not an actual demon, because we just want people to have a nice time. I mean, demonic entities typically just want people to have a nice time. Now, the first fun fact of this particular skip is that this devil comes from Ireland and speaks with an Irish accent. The second fun fact is that at the end of the article, SCP personnel offered a situation in which it will no longer need to heed summons from others, and in exchange, we simply wish it to give us some information on those who have summoned it in the past. Its response to this was, did you just offer me a deal? And personally, I find that hilarious. Tomorrow we go over 2068, Chaos Pump. Welcome back, agents. This morning we're going to be going over SCP-2068, Chaos Pump by Mr. Flames. Based on our research, it appears that 2068 was designed to anomalously replace the depleted resources of oil wells once they've been used up. Externally, 2068 appears to be a standard reciprocal pump. However, inside we found a variety of biomechanical structures, including neural analogs and various organs that we have no idea what in the void they do. Now, for an early skip, that could have just ended it there. It's an anomalous oil pump that has weird biomechanical structures on the inside that nobody knows what they do. Within the document, there are various addendums which let us know about various containment breach attempts by the oil pump itself. And yes, I do mean the oil pump and not a group of interest, because of course it's the oil pump itself and not a group of interest, it's an SCP. There were a variety of escape attempts, and here's where we're going to start our fun facts about this particular skip. My first fun fact pertains to the first escape attempt because it's probably my favorite. Don't get me wrong, all of the escape attempts are wonderful, interesting, phenomenal. However, the first one was particularly creative and clever, and also informative. During the first escape attempt, we learned something very important, which is that 2068 can create its own sort of synthetic virus that it can move through liquids and through the air. Isn't that just fascinating, and isn't that just wonderful? This virus is classified as 2068-1. As of now, the full extent of 2068-1's full capabilities are not yet known. However, we do know that it allows a fine degree of control over flesh, to the extent that it is even able to reanimate corpses. In the first escape attempt, some infected personnel vomited on a control panel to short out the circuitry, which I think is fascinating because it shows that it understands that the fluids would upset the circuitry. However, that it does not have the finesse of control to perform delicate sabotage with those it controls through the virus. The other escape attempts include things such as it making explosives, or acids, or poisons out of the various people that it controls. To date, the most fine control that has been shown was whenever a security officer was used for its firearm, opening fire upon other Foundation personnel trying to keep containment. We don't know whether this was using muscle memory or the organism inside the pump learning and realizing how to use it. However, it has been shown to operate simple machinery now. All in all, a fascinating skip, and I highly suggest you check out the full document. Join me tomorrow with the SCP with the most cursed name outside of SCP-4000, SCP-815, Snake Nut Can. Good morning, Site-34. Researcher Stolen here, and today we're going over SCP-815 by Kabu, Snake Nut Can. And yes, you heard me correctly. However, Site-Admin would kindly request that you go back and review SCPtober Day 1, as the distribution algorithm that we have seems to be malfunctioning and isn't getting it to the targets that it's supposed to. 815 is a very good example of an early skip that is very simple, does what it does, is very horrifying, and yet also very interesting without being overly grotesque or overly disgusting. And I'm going to just read the entirety of this description because it's that concise. 815 is a novelty snake nut can, a common prank device that consists of a small canister labeled salted mixed nuts, while in actuality containing 4 cloth-covered springs meant to represent snakes that fly out upon opening. X-ray and multispectral imaging have as yet determined no measurable unusual qualities of the can or the snakes. Upon opening, the snakes instantly vanish from the can and violently burst forth from the nearest person, see notes, face, with extreme force. High-speed video footage reveals that the snakes appear to emerge from the lower sinuses, typically shattering the nose, cheekbones, and upper jaw upon exiting. As a result, subjects often avoid major brain damage and remain alive until termination or death via blood loss or shock. After approximately 15 seconds, the can reseals itself and produces another 4 ordinary snakes. The method by which the snakes achieve such extraordinary velocity without breaking down is unknown. Note: researchers are to be reminded that SCP-815 acts on the nearest person, even when opened by robot. I don't want to have to keep cleaning up these accidents, people. From Dr. Myers. It's literally one of those prank devices you've probably seen a bajillion times out there, like prank stores or magic stores, things like that sell, novelty items that are silly. Except for instead of you open the can and it just jumps out at somebody's face and scares them, you open the can and it just erupts from somebody nearby's face, whoever happens to be the closest person. Which could be a very interesting lottery system, so to say, if you were to just have a robot open it from, like, space. Honestly, not a whole lot to have a fun fact about with this one, just because it is so concise, but I love how it is so short, but so functional and so successful. Sincerely, the only things that I didn't read that were part of the article were the containment class, which is safe, obviously, and the containment procedures, which is basically just put in a locker. I highly suggest you go read it for yourself, because it's very wonderful, and it deserves some more votes. I do hope you'll join me again tomorrow whenever I go over to SCP that I happen to share a name with. SCP-336,